All right, welcome everyone to this professional development workshop hosted by Everywhere She Maps, which is a program of YouthMappers. Today, we're focused on how you can master the interview in your internship and job search process. So we're going to start off with introductions. We're going to talk about the steps that you really need to take to research and reflect before you begin your interview process. Preparing for questions that you'll likely encounter as you participate in interviews. We're going to go through a brief practice exercise in breakout rooms. We're going to talk about how you can really show up to succeed and put your best foot forward. And then we'll have dedicated time for questions at the end, but please feel welcome to put your questions in the chat throughout the session as well. Unless you are asking a question, please do keep yourself on mute, but feel free to unmute if you want to chime in. So starting with introductions, I would love it if each of you could please put in the chat your name, as well as your university. If you're part of a YouthMappers chapter or you used to be, please put that in as well, in the country where you are living right now. As for myself, my name is Courtney Clark. I'm the program director for Everywhere She Maps through YouthMappers. I am based in the US. A few facts about me. I used to live in Guinea, West Africa for almost 2 years as a former Peace Corps volunteer. I've been involved in humanitarian mapping since 2014. My degree is a Master's of Business Administration, and I was recently elected to the board of the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. So thank you for introducing yourselves. Really excited to see who's here today. So before you even begin the process of thinking about potential interview questions or selecting the perfect outfit that you would wear once you receive an invitation to interview, I really encourage you to take some time to do some research and reflection. So let's talk about what that looks like. First, I think it's really important before you start any interview process, and probably before you even start your job or internship search process, to sit down and think about your strengths. Really assess your skills, and you can sort them into 3 categories. You can come up with your own categories as well, but this is how I like to think about it. So the first set of skills that you all definitely have would be knowledge-based skills. These are skills that you acquire from education or your experience. So it might be something you learned in class or through a YouthMappers mapping training. Could be something like computer skills, languages you speak, other technical abilities that you have. The second category of skills that I want you all to be thinking about as well is your transferable skills. So these are portable skills that you take from job to job. Even if you're doing a complete career change, there are skills that are important in any position, including communication skills, interpersonal relationships, analytical problem solving, planning. No matter what job you take, you'll likely need these. And then finally, you have your personal traits. So these are some of the qualities that make you really unique. You might be especially dependable or really great at being flexible and adapting to changing situations. Maybe you're known for being extremely friendly in the workplace or a great team player. So think about these. I encourage you to even write them down and just have that list for yourself. Then, when you're actually preparing for a specific interview for a specific role, I want you to go ahead and choose about 5 to 7 strengths that match what the employer is looking for in that specific job position. And think of examples that demonstrate that strength or that skill. So I know it can be a difficult thing to really assess ourselves and identify our own strengths and our skills. If you're having a challenge in doing that, here are some reflection questions that can help you get started. So first, you know, how did you develop any of your skills in the first place? What have you done either in secondary school, university, or post-university that has really made you who you are today and a great job candidate? For example, I'm sure you've built many skills from being involved in internships, jobs, fellowships, YouthMappers, of course, sports, clubs, other activities. So even if you haven't had a lot of formal work experience, you've still been developing skills throughout your uh, high school and university careers, and even after, by being involved in different organizations at your university or having those part-time jobs. So some of these skills that you've probably already have are leadership, teamwork, communication, really being able to take initiative and work independently, and problem solving. I am confident that all of you have these skills in hand because of your participation in YouthMappers or other open mapping activities. So after you have really thought about yourself and your own strengths, next it's time to really research and reflect on the exact position that you'll be interviewing for. So make sure you really carefully review the job description and the requirements. You can write out answers to the following questions I highly recommend. For example, what skills and experiences do you have that directly match the position? What skills and experiences do you have that are relevant or transferable, even if there's not a really direct and obvious connection between that skill and the position description? After you study that job description, you're going to want to really research and know the organization itself as well. This is something that interviewers will be looking for. They want to make sure that you are enthusiastic about their organization and that you care about what they do and that you've done your homework. So you're going to want to look up things like any information you can find about who their customers are, or if they're an NGO or a nonprofit, maybe who their beneficiaries are. Look for any content that's been written by their leadership, like articles, blogs, letters, interviews. Look for their recent press releases, see what's going on and what the organization is excited about. These are all things that you can reference in your answers. Look up competitor information if that's relevant, as well as some of their financials. Depending on the organization, this might be really easy or really difficult to find. For example, publicly traded companies on the stock market have to publish their financial data every year. Privately owned companies don't. So you may have more or less luck with that one. And then, of course, make sure you're reading their recent annual reports, any project descriptions or results that are on their website, case studies. Some of the sources you can go to for this information include, of course, the company website will hopefully be pretty rich with the information you need, but also use, of course, search engines. LinkedIn can be a really rich source of information as well. Glassdoor, you can read reviews about the company from current and former employees. Social media, news outlets, and your own network. So one element that I think is especially important to research is the values of the organization. Not only because most interviewers love it when you can talk about their organization's values, but also because you really want to make sure that their values align with your own, and that what they state as their values are truly what they are living out and demonstrating through the work that they do. So remember, not only is the organization interviewing you, you are also interviewing them. And you really want to be ensuring that they would be a place that you want to work and would be a good fit for you and your own interests as well. So making sure you do that research to find out in advance if that company or that organization's values align with your own is extremely important, because I can tell you from past experience that working for an organization that has very different values from your own will only lead you to be unhappy and probably get burnt out. So better to avoid that altogether from the beginning if you can. So after you've done your research, you've reflected on yourself, the position description, and the company, you're going to prepare for questions. There are many ways to kind of categorize the different questions that are used in job interviews, but these are kind of the most common categories. So the first is behavioral questions. These are focused on a specific situation that you probably have encountered in the past. The interviewer wants to find out how you responded. They're making the assumption here that your past behavior will be indicative of your future behavior. These are extremely common. I'm sure you're all familiar with them. The next type of question is situational or problem solving. So these are typically based more on hypothetical scenarios that you might encounter actually in the position that you're interviewing for. So they really want to test your ability to think on the spot and quickly problem solve. Usually in problem solving questions, they're not looking for the most perfect answer or the most exactly accurate answer to whatever question they're asking. Of course, you want to give a good answer to the question, but they're also really what they want to see is how do you think through problems? How do you approach problem solving? So when you're answering these questions, it's also really important to make sure the interviewer knows what's going on in your mind and how you're thinking about answering that question. And then skills assessments or tests. The employer might ask you to do some online questionnaires or surveys. They might give you a technical task that you have to complete within a certain amount of time. So just be prepared for that kind of question as well. For behavioral interview questions in particular, I highly recommend you use what's called the STAR method as you prepare for your interviews. So STAR is an acronym. It stands for situation, task, actions, and results. And it's a method that you will use to first describe the situation that you found yourself in when you're asked a behavioral interview question. So for example, an interviewer might ask you, give me an example of a time that you were working on a team and there was conflict within the team. You know, how did you handle that? How did you approach it? Okay, so first you would describe that situation, talk about the team that you were on, explain the tasks that your team was undertaking and what you needed to achieve, talk about what the conflict was. Next, you're going to describe the actions that you took. So what steps did you take to help resolve or manage the conflict and move the team forward, and why you took those actions? Make sure you're always giving the why behind what you did. And then you want to share the results that you achieved. So you could discuss, despite the conflict, I was able to take X, Y, and Z actions, and then our team was still able to achieve, the results that we set out with. And you want to be using as much as you can quantitative data to talk about the results that you've achieved. So there are so many lists of common behavioral interview questions online. I share some here as well. So make sure you're reviewing those common questions. And even in advance of your interviews, you can quickly prepare your STAR stories, we call them, for each of those questions. So you kind of have them already in your mind and already on hand when you walk into the interview. As I mentioned, I am giving some example questions as well. I won't read through all of these directly. They're more for a reference. for you after the session. But now we're going to take a pause from the presentation and go into a more interactive exercise. So I want you all to choose a question from this list. We'll start there and then I'll explain the rest of the exercise. I'll give you about a minute to choose the question, write it down somewhere, or take a picture on your phone so you have the question with you. For those who just joined, we're about to do an interactive interviewing exercise. And so if you could choose one of these interview questions that are on the screen right now, either write it down or take a screenshot so you have the question handy. Okay, so hopefully everyone has had a chance to review and select the question that they prefer. I'm going to go back to the previous slide. I also want you to write down what the STAR acronym is. So remember, it means situation, task, actions, and results. I'm asking you to write these down because when we go into the breakout rooms, you won't be able to see the slides. So make sure you're writing this down or taking a screenshot or a picture with your phone. Okay, hopefully everyone's done that. Now I'm going to put you in breakout rooms, 2 to a room. So you'll have a partner to be working with. And I want you to first tell the partner what question you selected. And then you're going to answer that question for your partner using the STAR method. So for example, if I chose, give me an example of a time that you exceeded expectations. And let's say Laura is my partner. I'm going to say to Laura, okay, I selected this question and now I'm going to answer it for you using the STAR method. You'll then give your answer, try to keep it to about 2 minutes, and your partner will give you feedback or ask follow-up questions to help clarify your answer. And then you'll switch. So the partner who listened before will then answer the question that they selected using the STAR method, and the person who's listening will give feedback or ask clarifying questions. So this is just a short exercise to help you all start getting in the mode of answering interview questions and being able to get feedback from your peers as well. I wish we had time for full mock interviews, maybe another time, but we're going to start with this exercise. Are there any questions before I put you into the breakout rooms? No. Okay, perfect. So we are at 27 minutes after the hour, at least according to my clock. And so we're going to stay in these breakout rooms for about 8 minutes. That will give each person 2 minutes to give their answer and 2 minutes to receive feedback, and then you switch. Okay. Let me set these up. All right, welcome back, everyone. I'd love to hear in the chat if you learned anything interesting during those practice questions. You know, any questions that you have for me or for each other as you come out of those sessions. So please feel free to put in the chat anything interesting you learned, your takeaways from that activity. And I'm going to jump to the next section of the presentation. Okay, so one particular question that I want to spend some particular time on is identify a weakness or describe one of your weaknesses. This is a pretty common this is a pretty common interview question, and it's a pretty tricky one to answer. And someone gave me some amazing advice when I was younger about how to answer this question that I wanted to share with you all. So, as I mentioned, this can be a very dreaded question within the interview. You know, of course, everyone has weaknesses, but who wants to admit them, especially in an interview? So, to answer this question, you really want to make sure that you are citing a weakness that can be measurably improved fairly quickly with additional training. So you don't want to select a weakness that an interviewer might consider to be just part of your personality, part of who you are, something that can't be changed. Instead, you want to talk about a weakness that can be resolved and can be addressed if you just had additional training. So this could be like a software tool that you want to learn more about. For example, maybe you're not super strong in QGIS. That could be the weakness that you cite. So you could talk about how you don't have the skills that you might want to in that software tool, but describe your plan for addressing that. It's amazing if you've already taken some steps to improve your skills. For example, you might be able to tell the interviewer, this is my weakness, but I've been taking an online course, or I've been practicing 3 times a week in QGIS to improve my skills. So this will show the interviewer that you are able to recognize and identify your own weaknesses or skills you need to work on, and you're able to take the initiative on your own to figure out how to improve those skills, which is incredibly impressive for any interviewer. Okay, so doesn't have to be limited to software tool. It could be a language that's really important for that specific position. Maybe a project management technique that you want to have more experience with this. So really just making sure you minimize the trait, emphasize the positive steps that you are taking to work on that weakness. There are a few slides that I'm going to skip over that just have more sample questions and some suggestions for them. I'll ask you after the session to kind of read through those on your own when I share the slides with you. But I want to talk a little bit about, how you can really show up to succeed the day of the interview, whether it's online or in person. So if you're going in person, you want to be really prepared in mapping out exactly the route that you need to take or what kind of transportation you need to arrive at the interview. Make sure you've made all of those arrangements in advance. Make sure you write down questions that you want to ask the interviewer. Almost every interviewer will give you an opportunity to ask questions. Don't think of this as an imposition on them, or say, no, I don't have any questions because you think it might bother the interviewer. In fact, it's the opposite. So when I'm interviewing people, if they don't have any questions for me, that's a red flag. Because to me, it kind of indicates a lack of interest or curiosity in the position, or just a lack of preparedness. So make sure you do have those thoughtful questions prepared in advance. Try not to ask questions, that you could easily find the answers to online. That could annoy the interviewer. Make sure you, of course, are dressing appropriately, as you all know, arriving early, bringing the paperwork that they request. And then this is less and less a common practice, but writing a thank you email to everyone who interviewed you within 24 hours of the interview can actually really help you stand out because it's less common for people to do. So make sure you have the email address of everyone who interviews you. Just ask them for their business card, for example. During the interview, I'm sure this is review for everyone, but it's still good to go over. Um, Make sure you're smiling and showing enthusiasm. Make proper eye contact. Eye contact is actually kind of different from culture to culture. For example, in the US, making eye contact with someone shows that you are confident and that you feel secure. So it would be a positive thing to do. I know in other cultures, making too much eye contact can actually be seen as a negative. So just make sure you're aware of the cultural norms wherever you're interviewing. Um, Make sure you're, of course, greeting the interviewer by name. You can ask the receptionist before your interview to help you with the pronunciation if you need, or if it's an online interview and you don't know how to pronounce the person's name, just ask them. That's perfectly acceptable. Of course, try to be relaxed and really close out the interview on a strong note. Make sure you indicate that you really are dedicated and excited about the position, and make sure you ask them for next steps as well. They should be able to at least give you a general framework or time frame of what they'll be doing next in the interview process. Things you want to avoid. I know earlier I mentioned writing down some of your star stories, thinking about those in advance, but make sure you're not just reciting those answers. You don't want to look too robotic. Try not to arrive overly stressed. Another reason to show up early so you don't have to be stressed when you get there. Only bring water, don't bring any other kind of food or gum with you. Of course, avoid controversial topics. Don't speak badly about your former boss or job or company. For example, if they're asking you, why did you leave your previous job? Even if it was a horrible company to work for, you don't want to say that because it's another red flag. So you can just be diplomatic and say something like, I learned a lot through my former position at this company. And I just really thought that it's the time for me to make the next step in my career. I'm very excited about the position that you are offering and about your company. So turn it into a positive. Make sure that you ask for clarification if you don't understand a question. Again, this shouldn't be a problem at all. Interviewers are very understanding, and I didn't have this written down, but also if you need a minute or two to think about your answer, that's totally acceptable as well. I would try not to do that for every single question, but it's more than fine to ask an interviewer for that time. You want to make sure you're giving your best answer. And so take that time if you need it. Don't make any excuses. Obviously, don't lie. That kind of goes without saying. And then avoid just talking about any kind of like personal or family issues that might be going on. Okay, so that wraps up the slides. There's a lot more information on them. Like I said, I will share the slides for you to kind of have as a reference and a resource for yourselves. At the end of the deck as well, I have a lot of helpful links to other online resources about interviewing. The best thing that you can do is just practice, practice, practice. Do practice interviews with your friends, your peers, your mentors and professors, even your family members, in front of the mirror. Just get really comfortable talking about yourself, talking about your experiences, so it seems really natural and relaxed when you're in front of an actual interviewer. All right, I will end there. Very happy to take any questions that you might have, either in the chat or go ahead and unmute yourself. While you're thinking about those questions, I'm going to share a link to an evaluation form. And it should only take you, a minute or two to fill out, but it's extremely helpful to us to improve these sessions. And as I mentioned, we're having a lot of professional development sessions until throughout January of next year. If you attend 3 of the sessions and you complete the evaluation form for each, you have to use the same email address so that I know it's the same person. But if you attend 3, complete the evaluation forms, I will give you a personalized resume review with feedback on the resume that you sent me. So there's the link to that evaluation form. I also put a link in the chat to the YouthMappers Eventbrite page. You'll see posted all of the upcoming professional development sessions that we'll be hosting. I'm about to publish some more as well. So if you follow YouthMappers on Eventbrite, you'll receive an email every time we post a new event, so you won't miss anything. All right, we have a question from Robbie. Good to see you here. What sorts of things must we explain when the interviewer asks, tell me something about yourself, which is not in the CV or the resume? That is a very good question. So I would, there are so many things about yourself that you wouldn't necessarily include on a CV or a resume. So it, kind of depends on the job or the position that you are interviewing for. But you could talk about, for example, a personal hobby. Let them get to know you a little bit outside of the professional realm. So talk about a personal hobby or activity, but make sure to tie in kind of what skills or what positive experiences you've had through that. So you might say, maybe you're a runner, you like to go jogging or running. You could say, it's not on my resume, but I am an avid jogger. I recently ran a half marathon and it was a great experience. I learned a lot about perseverance and sticking to a goal, even when it's difficult. So I would talk about something like that. People like to know people on more than just a professional level. So that's a good question. Hopefully that answered your question. Okay, Aman has a great question. That's wonderful. These days, most of the interviews are held, we wear a mask, of course. So what sort of advice would you provide so that we sound and look confident? This is a wonderful question. So even if you're wearing a mask, you can still have confidence in your voice. You can project and speak with a very professional tone and pitch. So the mask, for example, shouldn't really affect how you sound. But in terms of how you can look confident, I would still, at certain times in the interview, smile, even wearing your mask, because I think we've all experienced, you can tell even when someone's wearing a mask, whether they're smiling or not, especially you can see it in your eyes. So feel free to do that, even if it feels kind of silly behind a mask. You want to show that you're a pleasant person, you're excited to be there. And interviewers will understand. They know that it's also kind of a strange situation to be interviewing someone in that way. So as long as you're smiling, having that confidence in your voice, I think you'll be doing just fine. Oh, Michael has an amazing suggestion in the chat. He wrote that a self SWOT analysis can also work before an interview. I love that idea. I've never heard of doing a self SWOT analysis. So for those of you who might not be familiar with that term, SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's often used to assess an organization or a program within that organization to identify what's going well and what the challenges are internally, as well as what are kind of external opportunities and external threats to that program or that organization. So you can actually perform this on yourself as well to better understand your strengths and your opportunities for growth. I think that's a great idea. And there are plenty of resources online about SWOT analysis, if that's something you want to look up. Oh, good question. How to answer salary expectations. This is a very tricky question, of course. So I would say before you even go into an interview, you should know what your you should have two numbers in mind. Okay, one should be, what is the minimum salary you require? You know that below this level, you won't be able to, have a living wage. You won't be able to feed yourself or pay your rent, all of these things. So you have to know your absolute minimum. Of course, that's not what you want to be making. And that's not the number you want to say for your expectation, but you have to know that and keep it in mind. Then you want to know what is a reasonable or an expected salary for this kind of position. There is so much data online these days about kind of average or typical salaries for different positions. Glassdoor is an excellent place to look, especially if it's a large organization. Probably many people will have anonymously posted what their salary was. So you can see even if that's listed for the position that you're interviewing for. Of course, that's just what people are posting. It's not necessarily vetted by anyone. So kind of take it with a grain of salt, but do research about your industry. If you know people working in similar roles, you trust them and they trust you. You could even ask if they'd be willing to share even a range of what they're making. And then as with any negotiation, you want to start a little bit higher than what your expectation is to leave room for negotiation. So if you want to make, I'm just giving an example. If you want to make like $50,000 a year, start out by saying 60 or 55. That leaves you some wiggle room. And if they don't ask you your expectations, but they just tell you this is the salary that we pay for this position, the next thing that comes out of your mouth should be, is this negotiable? You want to find out right away if you have a chance to negotiate that salary. Cool. I see a hand raised from Benedicta. Do you have a question?
Yes, please.
Great.
So related to the salary question, see, some organizations too would sometimes state the gross salary per annum in maybe probably when you are filling the an application. So with that, how do you state your salary range you want to receive or something like? How do you state? Though the organization will state the gross per annum. So how do you state, or how do you approach it?
Oh, I'm sorry. I think my connection cut out for just a second. Would you mind repeating your question again?
Sure. I'm saying relating to the salary question, some organizations state sometimes the gross per annum salary you would receive or you would get. And with that, how do you approach that? If you are being asked, because they would ask you probably, how are you expecting to receive? And they've also stated their gross per annum that they would you would receive? How do you tackle such a question? Like, how do you answer such a question if you have been asked? So say a company will tell you your gross per annum will be like between 10,000 to 20,000 per annum, and they would ask you how much are you willing to receive?
Mhm.
How do you tackle it?
Okay, sure. So if I understood correctly, if they gave you that range, for example, like you just said, between 10,000 and 20,000, and they ask you what you would accept, you want to say 20,000, say the highest number, because they've already given you a range to work with. So if they're saying numbers to you, then that clearly means they're willing to pay that much. So don't be afraid to ask for the most that they're willing to pay. Hopefully that helps.
Sure. I was thinking probably if you should state the highest they stated, probably they would be having a different thoughts or something. Probably they were thinking you are in more for the money than you are giving. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, okay. Now, another thing to note, and this is making me think I need to have another workshop on negotiations and salary negotiations. So keep an eye out for that. I will do that. You know, when you're negotiating your full compensation package, I was saying, ask for the highest amount of money they're willing to pay. Typically, that's what I would suggest. They can come back with a lower number and you can accept that. But remember that you don't just have to negotiate on salary. So for some organizations, it's very fixed what the salary is. They pay everyone who takes a certain job the exact same amount, and there's not really any room for negotiation. There are still other benefits and elements of your job that you can negotiate on. So let's say you're happy with the salary, but you want to ask for a few more vacation days, or you want to ask for some more flexibility around your hours or working from home or any of these things. Those are other parts of your work situation that you can negotiate as well. So it doesn't just have to be focused on your salary. No, that wasn't your question, but something important to keep in mind. All right. I think those are all the questions. Oh, Aman, what if we face a question where we do not have a story to build or cannot do STAR at the very moment? Can you suggest the best way to answer at that moment? Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say typically behavioral interview questions are pretty general. And most of you will have had experience with a lot of them. But if you don't have a story to build on, don't be afraid to, you don't want to lie, you don't want to make something up. You can say like, well, I don't have a lot of experience with that particular situation, or I haven't faced that particular situation before, but this is how I would approach dealing with conflict, for example. So talk about the approach that you would take instead of what you did in the past would be a good example. And then, just really kind of be creative with the situations that you pull from. As students or recent graduates, of course, you don't have so many years of work experience under your belt, but you could pull from an athletic team that you were on. Maybe you faced that situation there, or maybe you faced it in a volunteer activity that you did. So you have a wealth of experiences outside of formal work and internships that you can pull from. And also, as I mentioned before, ask for a few minutes to kind of think about your answer before you dive in. Awesome. Well, we are a few minutes over time. I'm happy to stay on. I know some folks have to have to log off for other things. So I just want to thank you so much for joining. Again, please fill out the evaluation, sign up for future sessions. I'm going to start working on building a workshop around salary negotiations and negotiations more generally. So keep an eye out for that. And feel free to reach out with any other questions you have.